As the mother of a toddler, I remember sorting books at a church rummage sale with my baby in a backpack hanging over my shoulder, looking with interest at what was in front of us. And one year, he reached out for a book that had an interesting cover, The Big Book of Peace. And I got him a copy thinking that someday we would read it together. There were 4 on the table at that UU book sale. But by the time he got to the point where he could understand the stories in it, such as the one I read today, he wasn't really that interested. And can I say that our youth were looking pretty stony-faced when I read that story today? I knew that might happen, but it was important for a reason. The 9/11 attacks had happened. Somehow the whole idea seemed a little antiquated, and eventually I donated that book to another UU church book sale. Now, I don't know if you're feeling like I am, a little bit of a kind of whiplash today, because there's, the words of the hymns that we sang when we came in, and then there's the beautiful but dissonant sounds of our prelude, and then there's the words of the prayer, and then there's the words of our hymns. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like we're moving back and forth between different views of the world, because in fact, we are. Now, my early childhood years were in the 1960s, and what I remember about them was an odd stew of trips to the recycling center, making peace signs out of yarn-covered cardboard, and weird pictures of what was supposed to be a globe, but really looked like an off-centered circle of various green and blues. We were also warned, despite these values, not to talk to the hippies we passed smoking on stubbly blankets on the quad as we walked downtown to spend our quarters on candy. You could get whole pieces of candy for a quarter, which my parents said cost a penny in their childhood. Things were changing, and yet in strange and unresolved ways. Memorial Day, in fact, has changed as well since then. Until 1971, it was known as Decoration Day. It was a day that was initially set aside to, though it had evolved, of course, by the time it was renamed, to decorate the graves of the huge number of young people, mostly men, who died in the Civil War. Over the years, it's changed, it widened to include the dead of other foreign wars. Memorial Day is not a day to honor veterans, though we should always do that, as Andrew said, but rather to honor those U.S. citizens who lost their lives in conflict. Those in the Big Book of Peace camp are often unclear what to do with this holiday, though clearly honoring anyone who died is valid, for each death is significant. The United Nations was created in 1945 to protect Europe from feeling once again the scourge of war. That's actually in its charter. And that over time has also been widened, that field. In the last year, they have been involved in 12 different peacekeeping missions with 12 different conflicts worldwide, 3 in Africa, which have the greatest mortality. And they report that while the number of people killed in battles has decreased, in fact, around the world, and especially in the Americas, they note, homicide now kills many more people than military service. The number of people who die because of displacement and famine has skyrocketed. The Nation magazine reports, in the secondary effects of war in just one conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, 5.4 million people have died since 1998. At one point, 54,000 a month were dying in that conflict because of famine. This is incomprehensible arithmetic for us. It tends to overwhelm us, and so we close our hearts and see it as not our concern. The Nation reporter goes on to say the massive humanitarian intervention needed today in Sudan, Yemen, and Syria is not in the cards, and that neglect has brought about horrific consequences. Now, this is one of the 2 copies of the Big Book of Peace that are here in this church's library. They're in the Owl Room, where we're currently revising a new library. And I think we probably won't keep both because most millennial parents and some emerging Gen Z parents see the world in a really different way. They're worldwide consumers, not just of the products of other countries, the games, of the trends, the fashions, but also of news 24/7, as Reverend Kevin said in his prayer. And it's broadening the way that they think about who we should be concerned about and what the world looks like. And I think that's something that we have to hear. I wanted to hear this prayer today. I asked for my colleague, Chaplain Kevin Mann, whom I have known since he was a teenager. And I asked him because I know that in the span of opinions we have across Unitarian Universalism, while he's on one side, he's not on the farthest of that side. But I thought he would represent a view that we don't always hear in this sanctuary. The United Nations was created to protect life, as I said, from the scourge of war, and to the end of his life, our late member Bob Hansen was involved in efforts to keep us aware of their activities. He would email me every couple months and tell me what was going on. A recent UN report in the State of the World said globally the absolute number of deaths has been declining, yet conflict and violence are currently on the rise. Unresolved regional tensions, a breakdown in the rule of law, absent or co-opted state institutions, illicit economic gains, and the scarcity of resources exacerbated by climate change have become dominant drivers of conflict. So that story about the 4 children who go to Dead Horse, Alaska, thinking only of their own needs, might be a cautionary tale for us about the fact that we cannot afford to think only of our own needs, but we ignore global conflict at our own peril. Those we honor today, and I hope we'll see some more names on our poppy board before we finish, died in foreign wars, and yet increasingly were caught in false choices about what our role should be in the world. People say we should be the world's policeman or we shouldn't. We should be isolationist or not. We neglect the option of being just a part of a united solution run by processes of dialogue and democracy through alliances such as NATO and the United Nations, where we are just one member, not the only power. An AP poll found that only 21% of adults think it would be a good thing if the next president were able to act on important policies without the approval of Congress or the courts. And yet, there is more tolerance of that idea among partisans when the president is from their own party. And sometimes, the US thought it was keeping the world safe for democracy. And yet now, we struggle to keep democracy safe in the United States. As part of our efforts to rethink our role in the world, I hope we will think about, especially those children affected by war, the children in Ukraine, in Russia being conscripted, the children in Gaza, in Israel, the children in the Sudan, in Yemen, in all the places in the Congo. Perhaps this is worthy of some thought between times of needed rest tomorrow, because it would be a small step towards the actions of true peace. And I'm going to ask you to join with me in a ritual, though I realized I do not have a heart with me because I gave mine away when we were, thank you, Ron. Thank you, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm going to come down near our poppy board here, because I do hope you'll take a moment and write the names of those that are on your heart for this Memorial Day as well. But you know, one thing that we do is we want to safeguard our hearts. But I think when we do that, we forget that our hearts don't just belong to us. They belong to all of us. And we live in a world in which, if we are people of care and love, it is hard not to be brokenhearted. It is truly hard. So I'm going to invite you, with just great care and tenderness, just to divide your heart into 2 pieces to reflect that brokenheartedness that we all share today. And I'm going to invite you to take one of those pieces and hold it in your hand, to remember that your heart has more strength than perhaps you know. More capacity to love, more capacity to feel, more capacity to notice what's happening in our world. And then I'm going to invite you to just turn without words and just offer your heart to someone else around you. Because together we can hold more in our heart than we can hold alone. And in this way, may we take a step towards that true peace. So may it be.